Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened to me when I was in my mid-20s. I was loving my life. I had my own place, a laid-back job, and I partied a lot and had my fair share of short-lived relationships. Sometimes, you just don't vibe with someone in a relationship like you thought you would, but you work just fine as friends. That was typically what happened to me. I kept telling myself that if the right person came along, I would be willing to give it a try, but I couldn't see myself with them long term. But it looked like my luck was changing after meeting a girl at a party I went to. I'll call her Alyssa. Alyssa was basically a friend of a friend. I went to a party and my friend immediately was pushing me to go talk to this girl. He said that she was currently in college studying psychology. She was a year younger than me, but loved partying and was at nearly every one they went to. She was quiet at first, but quickly loosened up to talking and playing some of the games they had set up. We were there pretty late, just drinking, playing games and hanging out. And I was starting to like it, and she seemed pretty cool. So I mentioned that we should actually go on a date sometime. Her reaction was different than what I normally get. She was ecstatic. I remember she hugged me and said she would love to. No one's ever that excited. And that same day, she had already started texting me and wanting to set up a time to see each other. We ended up going out sometime the same week, and just as I hoped, it was a fantastic time. I had learned a lot about her schooling, and that she was very passionate about it and what she wanted to do. I thought it was fantastic as I didn't go to college, and seeing someone dedicating so much time to it and still having fun was refreshing. And this started the longest 6 months of my life. Everything started great for probably the first 2 months or so. We went on normal dates, and we continued to go to parties together, and she started to practically live with me. I was fine with this as she was an incredible cook, and I ate out too much. She cleaned a lot, and it made me realize how much I didn't. And she was just all around a good person to be with. Our lives were a lot of normal though. We worked, she had school, we had dinner together, and she even met my mother at one point. We were like a normal couple, and it was a refreshing feeling. But little by little, things started changing. I think it was about 3, almost 4 months in, and she was starting her semester finals, so she was studying a lot. Her job also had 2 people quit, so she ended up working more, so she was definitely under more stress than usual. I tried to give her her own time while she was doing schoolwork, so I would go to my living room and play something with my friends. A few times she would walk into the living room to see what I was doing. And one night though, she stood by in the doorway while I was playing and told me that she needed to talk. I was playing with a headset and talking to my friends, so I didn't hear her at first until she repeated. I quit the game and asked what was going on, thinking maybe she needed help with something. When she started asking me who I was playing with and what I was playing, I named off the 3 guys. One of them she didn't know, so she immediately started berating me with all these questions about who he was. I tried explaining to her that it was the brother of one of my friends, but she didn't believe me. I had her put on the headset and had them say hello to her real quick, and I guess that satisfied her. But then she started bawling. She apologized, calling herself crazy and explaining how her ex cheated on her, so she had trust issues. It wasn't the first time that I've dealt with that, so I wasn't upset or anything. I just tried my best to assure her that I wouldn't do that. I told my friends and I was done for the night, and I ended up spending the rest of it with her, and she was fine. This, however, became a normal occurrence. I would get ready to go somewhere or do something, and if they didn't involve her, she always had something come up to make it to where I didn't go, or she would tag along. I used to have dinner Sunday nights at my mom's, and since my father died, my sister and I promised to make it a regular thing to do with her. No one else, just us three. I took her with me once to meet them, and then she expected it every week. My mother didn't seem to be upset by it, but I could tell my sister was. I tried talking to Alyssa about it, saying that it was supposed to be a family thing and that she was always welcome to any other gathering we had. Well, she didn't like that. She was mad at me that Sunday, but when I came home, I brought her flowers and her favorite candy, and again, she seemed better. From then on, Sundays or the rare occasions us guys were able to hang out, something would come up. She'd say she wasn't feeling well and needed me to take her to ER. She would say that she needed my help with something that would normally take a few minutes and drag it out for hours. If none of these worked, she would always go back to accusing me of cheating. This got to a point that I just gave up. I hardly went anywhere, and if I did, she was with me. Some people were allowed over, but not often. And somehow, we managed to go out to dinner with our mutual friends, which was a nice change. At one point, she had left to use the restroom and asked for my friend's girlfriend, Heather, to go with her. So, it was just us guys left at the table. And once they were out of sight, he had asked me how things were going with Alyssa. I played it off saying we were good, when he told me that Heather was thankful Alyssa had found someone because she didn't take her previous breakup too well. He said she started staying at home a lot, not going out, and started having a lot of suicidal thoughts. That was all news to me, because that was definitely not something that I had seen. I didn't mention it to him, but I was a bit concerned about us being home more. The rest of the night was fine afterwards, but that had just stuck in my mind. I tried being more understanding and involve her in more things, but it seemed like it only made things worse. When she would go places that had other women there, she was glued to my side and always had her arm or leg or head resting on me. Then, when we would go home, she would go right back to accusations. I couldn't keep up with the differences and told her that she either needed to learn to trust me more or we were going to need some time apart. She, of course, took this the wrong way. She ended up leaving that night and stayed at her apartment. I tried calling her to make sure that she was okay, but she never answered. I drove to her apartment and saw her neighbor outside, saying that she had been gone all day, so I drove around to a few areas that I figured that she would be at, but I never found her. I ended up going back home to wait to see if she would contact me, and when I walk in the door, I see her sitting on my couch. I ask her what happened and where she was, and again, she was back to being cheerful. She said she wanted to call me but instead decided to wait on me to get home to surprise me. I was confused at what she meant by this, but that's when she dropped it on me. She said that she was pregnant and that she was dropping out of school so she could move in and spend more time with me. She said that this would prove to her that I was serious about her. I didn't know how to react at this that time. I hadn't even thought about having kids, and now here we are. And to drop out of school when she was so close to finishing was insane to me. There was a lot going on within that time and a lot to take in. And the next couple of weeks were a blur. She had me take her to get vitamins and other prenatal stuff. She was already talking about names and how we wanted to change the office to the nursery. My life was changing right before me, and I didn't know what to do. And sure enough, I was definitely home a lot more taking care of her. I finally had to tell my mom and sister since I had missed a few dinners. When my sister started questioning things, she had mentioned how this all started when we got into a fight that almost ended our relationship, and how it's held me back since then. She asked me if I had seen the test or went to any appointments with her, and I told her no. She told me to pay attention to things and to go to the next one. So I brought it up to her and she refused. She said that I couldn't go because men aren't allowed at that clinic, and then said because of the things they did that I couldn't be there. I wasn't a woman, so it all made sense to me, and I let it go. A few very long weeks later, I went to take out the trash from the cans in the bathroom and the bedroom, and I found some pretty compelling things. There were 2 tests in the can in the bathroom. I thought it was odd that they were there since it had already been a month, and I certainly had taken the trash out since then. So listening to my sister, I checked them. The tests were negative. Alyssa was sitting in the living room, so I had brought them out to her to question her. The fact that the color in her face left told me all I needed to know. I was confused and furious and asked why she would lie. She explained that she knew if she was, I would stay around more and she wouldn't have to worry about me leaving, but every time she checked, it was negative. But this time she said she felt it was wrong. She even admitted to tampering with our contraceptive items. I told her that I was done. I had tried too many times to help her, make her feel better about things, but this was too far. She had stolen the life that I had. I told her that we were done and that she needed to leave. Thankfully, she still had her apartment and just brought over some clothes. I slept on the couch that night, but the next morning, she tried to act like everything was fine, minus the fake pregnancy, and that we would get back together. This time I put my foot down. I couldn't keep at this. I helped her get the last of her stuff back to her place and gave her a hug. I told her that I knew she was a good person at heart and that she just needed some help. She asked if she got better and fixed herself if we could try again. I didn't want to make things worse, and I did care for her, so I agreed, which seemed to cheer her up some. And with that, I left. She still tried to call and text me on a regular basis, and I didn't really want to talk to her, but I almost felt obligated. So if I did respond, it was always short answers. But then she would try to make plans for us, and I would have to ignore her at that point or tell her that I was busy. But that also didn't stop her. She started getting mad because I wasn't spending time with her, so I ended up having to tell her that we are not a couple, that we are not together, and I have no intentions of being with you at this point in time. I told her that she needed to focus on herself and move on, and if it was too hard with me just being a friend in her life, then maybe we need to cut ties altogether. She lost it at that point. She screamed on the phone. She said things that I wouldn't repeat, so I told her that we were done and I hung up. However, me not responding to messages and phone calls wasn't enough to make her stop. She would call my mom and ask her about me, and my poor mom didn't know what to say, thinking we were just fighting, and would tell her that she would have me call her. She would show up at random places, conveniently, at the same parties that I would go to. She would be over at my friend's house saying that she was there to see Heather, but would immediately try to latch on to me so I would leave. I've seen her parked outside my work and outside my apartment. I work as a mechanic fixing big trucks and semis. So unless the truck belonged to you, there was no reason for customers to be there. Yet, she would show up and even go in and ask for me, so I would hide in the back and they would tell them that I wasn't there. She always begged them to let her stay and wait for me, but thankfully, they always told her no and that there was nowhere she could wait safely. But instead of just leaving though, one time she demanded to speak to me because she was having my kid and it was important. I did not tell my work about any of the pregnancy stuff, so they were pretty surprised when they heard that, and I was furious. I tried calling her to tell her that we needed to talk, but she didn't answer. However, by the time I got home, she was sitting there in her car. She got out smiling and I came unglued. I went off about her following me and showing up at my work. I told her that she had no right talking about the pregnancy to people at my work since it was fake. She claimed that she was actually pregnant this time. I told her to show me proof and show me the test and show me something from the doctors, anything to let me know if she was being honest. And again, her response was she just knew. I probably shouldn't have, or rather, I knew I shouldn't have, but I told her that she was crazy. I told her that I wanted her out of my life and I never wanted to see her again. And without saying a word, she left, and I didn't hear from her for a few days. I thought it was finally over. Her friend, Heather, had tried contacting me, asking if I had heard from her, as she hadn't heard from her either. I told her what had happened and that we no longer spoke, but that was about it. The following Sunday, I went to my mom's for our normal dinner, and while I was over there, I got a text from her that said, "I loved you. It's all on you now." I ignored it at first, but it was starting to eat at me. So I left my mom's place early to try and talk to her. I called her, but she didn't answer. I went to her place and her car wasn't there. I caught her neighbors outside who said that she had left around 5 p.m., which was about the same time I left for my mom's. My only thought was that she went to my place to wait for me to talk or beg me to get back together because she still had a key to my place. I know it was stupid, but I didn't really think about it that time. And when I got home, I noticed my front door was unlocked and I heard music playing. It was the song she claimed was ours because we listened to it on our first date. The music was coming from the bathroom. I knocked on the door to ask her to come out so we could talk, but there was no response. I continued trying to talk to her for several minutes and I didn't get any response. So I pretended to leave, opening and shutting the door, and just sat in the living room waiting for her to come out or something. When she didn't, after 10 minutes or so, I went back to the door and told her that if she didn't come out, I was going to come in. I should have done it sooner. I opened the door to find her hanging from the built-in shower door. I had to try and hold her up as I was struggling to untie the sheet, and the rest of the night was a blur. The cops came and pronounced her dead, and there was an investigation, of course, to make sure that I wasn't a suspect. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't bring myself to go to her funeral as I felt like I was to blame, but I did bring flowers to her grave afterwards. I moved out of my apartment too, and I stayed at a friend's place till I found a new one because, who could stay there? It's something that still haunts me to this day, but I've also learned from it, and I take mental health a lot more seriously today. Just take care of yourself, and if friends or family say they have any feelings like that, get them help. It will affect more people than you think when you're gone.
I met Carter at a convention. Right off the bat, he scared me. I heard rumors that he'd nearly been removed from the extremely liberal convention. But he seemed nice enough and lonely. So I decided to befriend him instead. Then I noticed that he was always nearby. When I was walking to my hotel, he was there. When I was eating lunch, he was there. When I was in my private group, he waited outside the door. When I went to meetings, he was there too and sat beside me. He usually either walked up to me and started a conversation, which ended in an awkward silence, or just stared at me from 50 yards away. I couldn't believe he was really following me. So I went to my hotel, disguised myself, and went outside to see if he was there. He was, literally lurking in the trees nearby. He pressured me into giving him my number, so I gave him a fake one. He found my professional information and begged me to look over his work, to which I declined. He asked me if I'd be at a party. I lied and said no. He showed up anyway. Somehow he knew I'd decided to go. He always talked about how lonely and depressed he was, and how I was a lifeline, until, on my way home from the convention, I had no service during the flight. He freaked out and spammed 49 messages until ending with, "Okay, fine, I'm gonna end myself now, just so you know," strongly implying that it was my fault for not answering him immediately. I told him to call 911 and then blocked him. He contacted me through Instagram, Hangouts, email and more, but I never replied. I asked the convention security to speak with him about his creepy behavior, and I was told to just switch off my phone. Fast forward a few months, I get an email from James asking me to look over his work. Not a big deal. I run a program specifically for this sort of thing. I agreed, since his email was very polite and well worded, but he seemed pushy in a way I couldn't quite figure out. I ignored it, reviewed his work, and ceased communication. You know where this is going. A little while later, he confessed that it was Carter all along. He put all the blame on me and apologized in a horribly manipulative way, begging me once again to review his work. I never replied, and here we are. James/Carter, let's never meet again.
I like to play a lot of MMO games, and I can get pretty competitive in them, so I've made some enemies, but also made quite a few friends. And after talking to some, I ended up meeting up with them, and we hung out to play games together, see a movie, and even went to some conventions together. This was pre-2020, and shamefully, I've even gotten a few regrettable dates that went nowhere. And this story is about one guy that just couldn't take no for an answer. A few years ago, I was heavily into playing a popular MMORPG. Sometimes, I like bringing smaller level people into places that they wouldn't normally be able to take on so they could get better rewards. I took a group of people, and after a few rounds, people were happy and thankful, some more than others, and I had one person stick around after the others had left, and he was talking to me, asking how certain crafts and skills work. Nothing unusual, and I was okay with helping him out. He added me as a friend, and we moved on from there. I had to work some longer shifts the next few nights, so I didn't play for a couple days. And when I finally got a night off, I decided to play some. Not long after logging in, this guy joined the same server and came over talking to me. He was excited to see me because he had managed to grind to the point that he was up to my level. I thought it was pretty impressive at that time because he was nearly half my level. And because of this, we ended up playing a new map together and took it out pretty quickly. It was pretty fun, and the guy was really funny. He had plenty of quips he would throw out, so it was amusing. We also talked a lot throughout playing, about what we did for work, and I found out that he actually lived and worked at a warehouse about 2 cities over from me. And after playing, we've had to have stayed up for another hour just talking. We seemed to have a lot in common, so I was excited about it at that time. I ended up just giving him my email so we could talk more, and we really started to hit it off. Other than games, we had a lot of similar interest. For about a week, we emailed each other and then decided to video chat. He looked like a pretty normal guy, and definitely not someone that looked intimidating. After about a month of talking, we decided to meet up. It was all in public still, and we went to dinner, then to a local arcade, had ice cream, and then we parted. It was actually a great night. He seemed super nervous at first, but I figured it was just because he was shy. And we both agreed that we should get together again, and then we parted ways. At this point, we had traded our phone numbers as well, so we called and texted regularly, and I was feeling really good about this one. I was honestly excited to spend some more time with him, so we set up another date. But this time, it did not go as well. It started out fine. We got to the restaurant, sat down, and as I was holding the menu or going for a drink, he would reach out and grab my hand. It wasn't a big deal at first. I thought it was a sweet gesture. But as he continued, he would make it more and more difficult to pull away from. I know I ended up mentioning that his hands were cold or something to try to get him to stop, which deterred him for a bit. But as we ate though, he started saying things that were really off-putting. We started talking about our plans for the future, and I mentioned that I have been saving up money so that I could visit my brother who was living in Japan, and that I wanted to travel abroad. He seemed visibly surprised or upset by this at first, which I've seen people react like that before, so I tried explaining my reasoning, and he cut me off to say something like, "Well, it would be pretty difficult to travel like that with kids." I was confused by this comment because I certainly didn't have any kids, and as far as I knew, he didn't have any either. So I just laughed and mentioned, "I agree. Thankfully, I don't have any, so that would not be an issue for me." Without as much as a smirk, he said, "Well, not yet, but when we do, it wouldn't be doable." I first started reiterating that I didn't want kids and I wasn't planning on having any, when it registered in my head that he said when we have kids. So I questioned him about it. He went on about how we were required to reproduce, and that was what we were born to do. I was blown away by this, because this was completely different from what we talked about prior. So, being friendly, I just told him that he can definitely have kids of his own someday, but I had bigger plans in life than to be tied down to a diaper bag. His reaction told me that that was not the right answer. He started going on about how it was all part of the plan, how we were destined to be together and have these genius kids that would save our country. I was in shock and incredibly disappointed as he came off as a great guy, but very quickly I knew that whatever was between us was now beaten, dead, and buried. So with that, I acted like I had a call to take, and I walked off to gather my thoughts. After pacing in the restroom for a few, I went back out. I put money on the table for my meal, and I told him that I had to go. He tried stopping me and asking me what was wrong and to stay longer, but I told him that I had an emergency, so I started walking out. By the time I got to my car, he was hollering for me, so I stopped for a second, thinking he may be just trying to say goodbye, or just maybe apologizing. But that was dumb of me. No, instead, he was saying he was sorry about what he said and rushing it, and that he could wait a few more months before we started having kids. At this point, I told him that I had to go, and I left as he watched me drive away. A little disappointed in the outcome, I ended up going back to work the next day and tried to find a way to let him know that I didn't want to see him anymore. And that night, I sent him a long email telling him that since we didn't really have mutual feelings and thoughts, that it was probably best to cut ties. It hadn't even been an hour when he tried calling me, and I ignored the first one. but then he called again, so I answered it. This guy was literally pleading and begging to not end it. I explained to him that his whole thing about the kids was way out of line and quite frankly creepy, and said that if he wanted kids, then I wasn't the person for him, as my mind was not going to change. And then he started crying on the phone, apologizing for his actions, and for a minute I believed him. Not to the point that I would try again, but that he seemed genuine. But he just kept making it worse. He then calmed down and said that if I would feel better about it first, then we could get married and then start having kids. At that point I told him that he really wasn't getting it. I don't want kids at all, and I don't want to marry him at all. And at this point, I don't want him in my life at all. I told him to stop calling and texting, as I would not be answering anymore, and then I hung up. He tried calling many more times, but I just ignored him. However, since he kept texting me too, I ended up just blocking his number. However, that didn't help for long. This guy went through 2 more phone numbers within 2 weeks, and each time I just kept blocking it. But he was persistent. One day while I was at work, I worked at a department store. I got a call on my walkie that someone was asking for me by my name. I found this odd because I was a department manager, so customers didn't really see me. So there would be virtually no reason for one to ask for me. So as I head to the front, there he is. Creepy guy holding flowers, waiting for me. I hadn't told him where I worked, just that it was a retail store, so I have no idea how he figured it out. I asked what he was doing there, and again, he went on about being destined and babies and everything, and at that point, I had had enough. The kind and cool manager everyone knew at my work snapped, and I went off. I called the dude a freak. I told him to leave me alone and to get out of my life and never come back here, or I would call the cops. His response was to drop the flowers at my feet, said that I would change my mind, and then left. Thankfully, my staff was supportive and put up alerts in case he came back so that they knew to call the cops. And fortunately, that wasn't the last of him. I saw him in other random places like the grocery store, at the park where I jogged, and at a restaurant. And mind you, he lived a few cities over, so why would he be at some of the places by me? I did end up calling the cops and asking about a restraining order, but frustratingly, they said they couldn't really do anything unless he actually tried something. So on the brink of giving up, I changed my number, tried to limit who I told where I was going, and was pretty much non-existent in social media or other public forums I would go on. It only got worse though. On a particular hot day, I ended up helping some people out at my work in a lawn and garden section. So as soon as I got home, I decided to get food delivered, and I would hop in the shower before it arrived. After I got out and I was brushing my hair, I heard a knock and then someone yell, "Hello?" I thought this was really odd, and it startled me at first because I knew I didn't have any windows open because it was so hot. So I ran to the living room and I noticed a lady standing there holding my food with the door wide open. And before I could say anything, she immediately apologized but said the door was open when she approached but didn't know what to do, so she just hollered. Nothing else seemed out of place or missing, so I just chalked it up to me not shutting it right. My house is old, and if you don't make sure to hold the doorknob a certain way, it won't latch and could swing open. So I just thought, being as tired as I was, that I didn't shut it right. I paid for my food, and the lady left, and I sat the food on the counter to start opening it, when I went to reach for a knife to cut the bag open. There was a knife missing. I looked around to see if I had used it and set it down somewhere, but my sink only had a coffee cup and spoon in it, and my dishwasher was empty. I didn't know what to do or what to think, so I just let it go for a moment, and I headed to the living room with my food. I noticed that my phone was pretty low, so I went to my room to grab my charger, and as I reached down to unplug it, that's when I found the missing knife under my bed. And that knife was being held by someone's hand. I was internally freaking out, thinking, how do I get out of this without letting them know that I was aware of their presence? So I grabbed my phone and I immediately called 911 as I walked out of my room, slowly. However, I pretended to call my work, and the conversation was something like this. 911, what's your emergency? Hey, Francis, can you do me a huge favor? It's very important. Ma'am, are you aware you called 911? Yes. Are you unable to talk? Yes. There's an envelope in my office with my address on it. 123, my address. Could you drop it in the mailbox for me? I forgot to, and it needs to be sent today. Do you need me to send someone to that address? Yes, please. They're on their way. I did not expect this to work, but I was beyond thankful it did, and that operator caught on quickly. I went out to the porch to wait, pretending to be doing something on my phone, all while watching inside for movement. When they finally arrived, they moved quickly into my house, and after a lot of yelling and commanding, the guy was finally dragged out. And to my horror, it was the same guy. I never told him where I lived, but I suppose, since he saw me so many times around town, that he must have followed me home one night. They also found zip ties and duct tape on him, and thankfully, that was enough to not only file that restraining order, but also was enough to press charges and put him in jail. And since then, I had my door replaced, and even so, I always make sure to lock it. I also rarely see people in person that I meet online. There are definitely good people in this world, but there are also people with bad intentions. Listen to your instincts though. It's usually not wrong. And also, never be afraid to call for help, even if you can't outwardly say it. Just listen carefully too, and they will understand. It can save a life. And here are the top comments from my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.